Season's greetings, my friends, and welcome to tonight's edition of Bedtime Stories for Grown-Ups. I want to thank all of you for your support. It is time to unwind. Find a place where you can relax. Once you have made yourself comfortable, take a deep breath. Your day is complete. There is nothing left for you to do today but listen to these stories and fall asleep. And so, we begin. It was the day before Christmas in the year 1890. Snow was falling heavily in the streets of Boston. But the crowd of shoppers seemed undiminished. As the storm increased, groups gathered at the corners and in sheltering doorways to wait for belated cars. But the holiday cheer was in the air, and there was no grumbling. Mothers dragging tired children through the slush of the streets. Pretty girls hurrying home for the holidays. Here and there, a harassed-looking man with perhaps a single package, which he had taken a whole morning to select. All had the same spirit of tolerant good humor. "School Street, School Street," called the conductor of an electric car. A group of young people at the farther end of the car started to their feet. One of them, a young man, wearing a heavy fur-trimmed coat, addressed the conductor angrily. "I said music hall, didn't I?" he demanded. "Now we've got to walk back in the snow because of your stupidity." "Oh, never mind, Frank," one of the girls interposed. "We ought to have been looking out ourselves. 6 of us, and we went by without a thought. It is all Mrs. Tyrrell's fault. She shouldn't have been so entertaining." The young matron dimpled and blushed. "That's charming of you, matey," she said, gathering up her silk skirts as she prepared to step down into the pond before her. "The compliment makes up for the blame. But how it snows." "It doesn't matter. We all have gaiters on," returned Matey Williams, undisturbed. "Fares, please," said the conductor stolidly. Frank Armstrong thrust his gloved hand deep into his pocket with angry vehemence. "There's your money," he said. "And be quick about the change, will you? We've lost time enough." The man counted out the change with stiff, red fingers, closed his lips firmly as if to keep back an obvious rejoinder, rang up the 6 fares with careful accuracy, and gave the signal to go ahead. The car went on into the drifting storm. Armstrong laughed shortly as he rapidly counted the bits of silver lying in his open palm. He turned indistinctively, but 2 or 3 cars were already between him and the one he was looking for. "The fellow must be an imbecile," he said, rejoining the group on the crossing. "He's given me back $1.20, and I handed him a dollar bill." "Oh, can't you stop him?" cried Matey Williams, with a backward step into the wet street. The Harvard junior, who was carrying her umbrella, protested. "What's the use, Miss Williams? He'll make it up before he gets to Scully Square. You may be sure. Those chaps don't lose anything. Why, the other day I gave one a quarter and he went off as cool as you please." "Where's my change?" said I. "You gave me a nickel," said he, "and there wasn't anybody to swear that I didn't except myself, and I didn't count." "But that doesn't make any difference," insisted the girl warmly. "Because one conductor was dishonest, we needn't be. I beg your pardon, Frank, but it does seem to me just stealing." "Oh, come along," said her cousin, with an easy laugh. "I guess the West End Corporation won't go without their dinners tomorrow. Here, matey, here's the ill-gotten 50 cents. I think you ought to treat us all after the concert. Still, I won't urge you. I wash my hands of all responsibility. But I do wish you hadn't such an unpleasant conscience." Matey flushed under the sting of his cousinly rudeness. But she went on quietly with the rest. It was evident that any attempt to overtake the car was out of the question. "Did you notice his number, Frank?" she asked suddenly. "No, I never thought of it," said Frank, stopping short. "However, I probably shouldn't make any complaint if I had. I shall forget all about it tomorrow. I find it's never safe to let the sun go down on my wrath. It's very likely not to be there the next day." "I wasn't thinking of making a complaint," said Matey. But the two young men were enjoying the small joke too much to notice what she said. The great doorway of Music Hall was just ahead. In a moment the party were within its friendly shelter, stamping off the snow. The girls were adjusting veils and hats with adroit feminine touches. The pretty chaperone was beaming approval upon them, and the young men were taking off their wet overcoats, when Matey turned again in sudden desperation. "Mr. Harris," she said rather faintly, for she did not like to make herself disagreeable, "do you suppose that car comes right back from Scully Square?" "What car?" asked Walter Harris blankly. "Oh, the one we came in. Yes, I suppose it does. They're running all the time anyway. Why, you are not sick, are you, Miss Williams?" There was a genuine concern in his tone. This girl, with her sweet, vibrant voice, her clear gray eyes, seemed very charming to him. She wasn't beautiful, perhaps, but she was the kind of girl he liked. There was a steady earnestness in her gray eyes that made him think of his mother. "No," said Matey slowly. "I'm all right, thank you, but I wish I could find that man again. I know sometimes they have to make it up if their accounts are wrong, and I couldn't. We couldn't feel very comfortable." Frank Armstrong interrupted her. "Matey," he said, with the studied calmness with which one speaks to an unreasonable child, "you are perfectly absurd. Here it is, within 5 minutes of the tune for the concert to begin. It is impossible to tell when that car is coming back. You are making us all very uncomfortable. Mrs. Tyrrell, won't you please tell her not to spoil our afternoon?" "I think he's right, Matey," said Mrs. Tyrrell. "It's very nice of you to feel so sorry for the poor man, but he really was very careless. It was all his own fault. And just think how far he made us walk. My feet are quite damp. We ought to go in directly, or we shall all take cold. And I'm sure you wouldn't like that, my dear." She led the way as she spoke, the two girls and the young Armstrong following. Matey hesitated. It was so easy to go in, to forget everything in the light and warmth and excitement. "No," said she, very firmly, and as much to herself as to the young man who stood waiting for her. "I must go back and try to make it right. I am so sorry, Mr. Harris, but if you will tell me them—" "Why, I'm going with you, of course," said the young fellow impulsively. "If I'd only looked once at the man, I'd go alone. But I shouldn't know him from Adam." Matey laughed. "Oh, I don't want to lose the whole concert, Mr. Harris, and Frank has all the tickets. You must go after them and try to make my peace. I'll come just as soon as I can. Don't wait for me, please. If you'll come and look for me here after the first number, and not let them scold me too much." She ended with an imploring little catch in her breath that was almost a sob. "They shan't say a word, Miss Williams," cried Walter Harris, with honest admiration in his eyes. But she was gone already, and conscious that further delay was only making matters worse, he went into the hall. Meanwhile, the car swung heavily along the wet rails on its way to the turning point. It was nearly empty now. An old gentleman and his nurse were the only occupants. Jim Stevens, the conductor, had stepped inside the car. "Too bad I forgot those young people wanted to get off at music hall," he was thinking to himself. "I don't see how I came to do it. That chap looked as if he wanted to complain of me, and I don't know as I blame him. I'd have said I was sorry if he hadn't been so sharp with his tongue. I hope he won't complain just now. 'Twould be a pretty bad time for me to get into trouble, with Mary and the baby, both sick. I'm too sleepy to be good for much, that's a fact. Sitting up 3 nights running takes hold of a fellow somehow when he's at work all day. The rent's paid, that's one thing. If it hasn't left me but $half to my name, hello." He was struck by a sudden distinct recollection of the coins he had returned. "Why, I gave him 50 cents, too much." He glanced up at the dial, which indicated the fares, and began to count the change in his pocket. He knew exactly how much money he had had at the beginning of the trip. He counted carefully. Then he plunged his hand into the heavy canvas pocket of his coat. Perhaps he had $half there. No, it was empty. He faced the fact reluctantly. 50 cents short, 10 fares. Gone into the pocket of the young gentleman with the fur collar. The conductor's hand shook as he put the money back in his pocket. It meant. What did it mean? He drew a long breath. Christmas Eve. A dark, dreary little room upstairs in a noisy tenement house. A pale, thin woman on a shabby lounge, vainly trying to quiet a fretful child. The child is thin and pale too, with a hard, racking cough. There is a small fire in the stove, a very small fire. Coal is so high. The medicine stands on the shelf. Medicine won't do much good, the doctor had said. He needs beef and cream. Jim's heart sank at the thought. He could almost hear the baby asking, "Isn't Papa coming soon? Isn't he, Mama?" "Poor little kid," Jim said softly under his breath. "And I shan't have a thing to take home to him. Nor Mary's violets, either. It'll be the first Christmas that ever happened. I suppose that chap would think it was ridiculous for me to be buying violets. He wouldn't understand what the flowers mean to Mary. Perhaps he didn't notice I gave him too much. That kind don't know how much they have. They just pull it out as if it was newspaper." And the conductor went out into the snow to help the nurse, who was assisting the old gentleman to the ground. Then the car swung on again. Jim turned up the collar of his coat about his ears and stamped his feet. There was the florist's shop where he had meant to buy the violets, and the toy shop was just around the corner. A thought flashed across his tired brain. Plenty of men would do it. They do it every day. Nobody ever would be the poorer for it. This car will be crowded going home. I needn't ring in every fare. Nobody could tell. But Mary, she wouldn't touch those violets if she knew. And she'd know. I have to tell her. I couldn't keep it from her. She's that quick. He jumped off to adjust the trolley with a curious sense of unreality. It couldn't be that he was really going home this Christmas Eve with empty hands. Well, they must all suffer together for his carelessness. It was his own fault, but it was hard, and he was so tired. To his amazement, he found his eyes were blurred as he watched the people crowding into the car. What? Was he going to cry like a baby? He, a great, burly man of 30 years. It's no use, he thought. I couldn't do it. The first time I gave Mary violets was the night she said she'd marry me. I told her then I'd do my best to make her proud of me. I guess she wouldn't be very proud of a man who could cheat. She'd rather starve than have a ribbon she couldn't pay for. He rang up a dozen fares with a steady hand. The temptation was over. 6 more strokes, then 9 without a falter. He even imagined a bell rang more distinctly than usual, even encouragingly. The car stopped. Jim flung the door open with a triumphant sweep of his arm. He felt ready to face the world. But the baby, his arm dropped. It was hard. He turned to help the young girl who was waiting at the step. Through the whirling snow, he saw her eager face, with a quick recognition lighting the steady ice, and wondered dimly, as he stood with his hand on the signal strap, where he could have seen her before. He knew immediately. There was a mistake, she said, with a shy tremor in her voice. You gave us too much change, and here it is. She held out to Jim the piece of silver which had given him such an unhappy quarter of an hour. He took it like one dazed. Would the young lady think he was crazy to care so much about so small a coin? He must say something. "Thank you, miss," he stammered as well as he could. "You see, I thought it was gone. And there's the baby, and it's Christmas Eve. And my wife's sick, and you can't understand." It certainly was not remarkable that she couldn't. "But I do," she said simply. "I was afraid of that, and I thought perhaps there was a baby, so I brought my Christmas present for her." And something else dropped into Jim's cold hand. "What you waiting for?" shouted the motorman from the front platform. The girl had disappeared in the snow. Jim rang the bell to go ahead, and gazed again at the 2 shining $half in his hand. "I didn't have a chance to tell her," he explained to his wife late in the evening, as he sat in a tiny rocking chair several sizes too small for him, "that the baby wasn't a her at all. Though if I thought he'd grow up into such a lovely one as she is, I don't know, but I almost wish he was." "Poor Jim," said Mary, with a little laugh as she put up her hand to stroke his rough cheek. "I guess you're tired. And I should say," he added, stretching out his long legs toward the few red sparks in the bottom of the grate, "I should say she had tears in her eyes too, but I was that near crying myself. I couldn't be sure." The little room was sweet with the odor of English violets. Asleep in the bed lay the boy, a toy horse clasped close to his breast. "Bless her heart," said Mary softly. "Well, Miss Williams," said Walter Harris, as he sprang to meet the snow-covered figure coming swiftly along the sidewalk. "I can see that you found him. You've lost the first number. But they wouldn't scold you, not this time." The girl turned her radiant face upon him. "Thank you," she said, shaking the snowy crystals from her skirt. "I don't care now if they do." I should have lost more than that if I had stayed. The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher, until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it. Which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had that word on the outlook for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below was a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also, appertaining thereunto, was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity, when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now the income was shrunk to $20. The letters of Dillingham looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim, and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a grey cat, walking a grey fence in a grey backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87, with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him. Something fine and rare and sterling. Something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were 2 possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs, in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. And the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the airshaft. Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still where a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sophronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up, Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sophronie. "Will you buy my hair?" asked Della. "I buy hair," said Madame. "Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it." Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. "Give it to me quick," said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone, and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worth the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value, the description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly, on account of the old leather strap he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas, and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at the reflection in the mirror, long, carefully, and critically. "If Jim doesn't kill me," she said to herself, "before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table, near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stair away down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things. And now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I am still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow. He was only 22. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read. And it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly, with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it, because I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone?" he said, with an air almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered." She went on with a sudden serious sweetness. "But nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year. What is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Della," he said, "about me. I don't think there is anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs. The set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoise shell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hand under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep 'em a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now, suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were a wise man, wonderfully, wonderfully wise man, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wiser ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat, who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are the wisest. They are the Magi.